Buried beneath the sand for 2,500 years, a breathtaking slice of Egyptian history is revealed.
Life in ancient Egypt was dangerous, but even death didn't guarantee safety. Being buried deep beneath the desert didn't mean your body was safe from tomb robbers.
Deputies say robbers turned over headstones, the clothes on bodies were removed, leaving behind bones, dentures, even infant remains.
For centuries, builders played a deadly game of outsmarting thieves, turning tombs into fortresses of deception. But one tomb stood apart. Its traps worked so well that it remained untouched for thousands of years. And when archaeologists uncovered it, what they found was jaw-dropping. You're about to see why no thief ever stood a chance. The tomb that outsmarted robbers. In the spring of 1941, archaeologist Zaki Saad lowered himself into a shaft at Saqqara. At first, he thought it was just another one of the many burials that had been cut into the desert. But it wasn't. This tomb turned out to be different, and it didn't even belong to a pharaoh. The man inside was a high-ranking official named Amenhotep, who lived under Pharaoh Apris in the 6th century BC. What made it special was the way it was built. The defense didn't involve giant stone blocks, swinging doors, or hidden blades. It worked in a much simpler, sneakier way. The harder you dug, the more the tomb erased your progress, until you had no choice but to quit. Thieves had tried for more than 2,000 years to break into it, and every single one of them failed. Saqqara was the cemetery for Memphis, one of Egypt's most important burial grounds. It stretched across the desert with pyramids, mastabas, and deep shafts, layer upon layer of history. By the late period, that's from the mid-7th century down to the late 4th century BC, tombs at Saqqara often took the form of long vertical shafts leading to underground chambers. Amenhotep's tomb followed that pattern, but the details were extraordinary. From the desert surface down to the top of the chamber roof, the shaft dropped about 72 feet. At the bottom, the chamber itself was cut from limestone, roughly 26 feet one way and 19 feet the other. It wasn't a tiny slot for a coffin. It was a proper room, and every inch of it had been planned for a purpose. Here's how it was laid out. 2 vertical shafts were dug side by side. At the bottom, a short tunnel connected them. One shaft was the large main shaft, the other a much smaller access shaft. The builders who carried out the burial used the smaller one. They climbed down, carried the body through the tunnel, and entered the chamber. The large shaft wasn't meant for people at all. It had been designed to act like a reservoir. That's why, when Saad reached the doorway to the chamber, he didn't see a stone wall or a blocked entrance. He saw it crammed with loose material that would not stay clear. His team scooped it away, and almost instantly, more slid back in, like the chamber was refilling itself. It wasn't bad luck. That was the trap doing exactly what it was designed to do. The ceiling revealed the trick. 3 round holes ran in a straight line across the roof. Each hole held a pottery jar fixed into the stone, but all 3 jars had their bottoms broken out. They weren't there for offerings. They were channels that linked the chamber straight up to the main shaft. So anytime someone tried to dig out the doorway, more material from the main shaft spilled in and refilled it. The big shaft was basically a giant tank waiting to undo any progress. Saad even spotted the marks left by ancient robbers, scratch lines from their tools, cuts in the rock, proof of their struggle. But no matter how hard they dug, they eventually had to quit. The system always won. That brings up the big question. How did the builders manage to carry out the burial in the first place? After all, the chamber was designed to choke itself off. The answer is in the sarcophagus. Inside the chamber was a coffin so large it looked more like a stone vault than a box. It measured about 13 3/4 feet long, 8.5 feet wide, and its lid alone was more than 3 feet thick. Saad estimated the lid's weight at about 30 tons, That's 30 tons of stone inside a cramped underground room. Moving it the normal way would have been impossible. The builders solved it by using a system that relied on sand and gravity. On each side of the lid were lugs, like stone handles, sticking out. Each one fit into a niche cut into the chamber wall. Behind each niche sat wooden beams supported by packed sand. At the bottom of each niche was a small outlet that connected to a deeper shaft, about 13 feet down. When the time came to close the coffin, the workers opened the little outlets. Sand trickled out into the receiving shafts. As the sand drained, the timbers lost their support and snapped. That let the lid slide down gently into place, sealing the coffin. It was slow, controlled, and safe. The builders had even made the outlets narrow, so the sand wouldn't rush out too quickly and cause the lid to slam shut and crack. With the coffin sealed, the builders then set the outer trap. They smashed the bottoms of the sealing jars, linking the chamber directly to the main shaft above. From that moment on, anything cleared from the doorway would be replaced. The chamber would never stay open. After that, the burial crew used the smaller shaft to climb out, topped everything with desert sand, and walked away. The system needed no guards. It was ready to protect the tomb forever. The order of events was simple but brilliant. The body was lowered down the small shaft. The sarcophagus lid rested on sand-backed supports. The workers opened the outlets. Sand drained into the deep shafts. The wooden beams gave way. The heavy lid settled into place. Then the jars were smashed, connecting the chamber to the giant tank in the main shaft. Finally, the crew escaped through the smaller shaft, leaving behind a tomb that sealed itself off. Saad could trace every single step from the physical clues still in the room: the niches in the walls, the deep receiving shafts, the sealing jars, and the clogged doorway. It all lined up, and this is why robbers never had a chance. The refill pressure came from a 72-foot column above them. Sand behaves in two different ways. It looks solid when it's still, but once it starts moving, it acts like a liquid. If you scoop a little trench, the slope collapses back into it. The faster you dig, the faster it collapses. Saad admitted that even with proper equipment in the 1940s, it took a very long time to clear the passage, because every shovel pulled out was replaced almost instantly. Imagine being a robber thousands of years earlier with nothing but a lamp and a small basket. To win, you'd have to clear out every single grain from the 72-foot shaft. Nobody ever managed it. The marks left behind showed where they gave up. Even if someone had somehow beaten the refill, they would have hit another wall, the massive coffin lid. When Saad's team finally opened it, they used jacks, a beam, and a rope looped around one of the lid's lugs. Even with all that, it took 15 days of work. When the massive lid was finally pried open in the early 1940s, Zaki Saad could finally see what lay inside the chamber that had beaten robbers for more than 2,000 years. The sarcophagus and the chamber walls carried inscriptions. One line spoke of the lotus of Nefertum, a symbol of rebirth and resurrection. The coffin spelled out the name of the man buried here, Amenhotep. He was not a pharaoh, but he was someone powerful enough to deserve this kind of protection. The titles carved on his coffin showed that he was tied to the royal guard and also served in the priesthood. That placed him close to Pharaoh Apis, ruler of Egypt in the 6th century BC during the 26th dynasty. The mummy was that of an older man. Strangely, it had no protective charms or amulets wrapped within its bandages. For burials of this status, that was highly unusual. Even more surprising, the body lay in a strange liquid. Saad actually collected samples of it for testing. None of this changes the trap story itself, but it gives the tomb a human face and locks it into a moment in history. That time period matters. The late period of Egypt ran from the 7th century down to the 4th century BC. Amenhotep lived in the Sate slice of it. The 26th dynasty. Tombs at Saqqara during this age often had the same core ingredients: deep vertical shafts, enormous stone sarcophagi, and deliberate use of sand as both a tool and a defense.
And they bring the sarcophagus from that tunnel and they put it above the sand.
Archaeologists working nearby have even uncovered other shafts that had been refilled in antiquity with clean, compacted yellow sand. That shows this wasn't some one-time trick. It was a practice that builders of that era used again and again. They had figured out how to cut shafts deep into the desert floor, how to move multi-ton stone boxes, and how to make sand work for them instead of against them. The tomb of Amenhotep is basically a case study in that know-how. Saad also highlighted how careful the builders had been about not triggering the trap while they were still inside. The ceiling holes were cut long before the burial, but the bottoms of the jars were left intact until the very end. The niches with sand-backed timbers were already in place, but the outlets at their base stayed sealed until the coffin was ready to be closed. Everything was staged step by step. The builders only opened the sand drains when the body was in place. They only smashed the jar bottoms when it was time to leave. They had tested how quickly sand would flow, how the timbers would collapse, and how to control the whole sequence. This wasn't guesswork. It was a system they knew would work. And about that smaller shaft, later writers often call it the escape shaft, but it was never meant for robbers. It was the safe way out for the burial team. On the day of burial, it let the workers climb down, set the coffin lid, smash the jars, and then climb back out alive. For anyone who came after, it offered no advantage at all. Once the chamber began refilling, it trapped intruders just as surely as the main shaft did. The same path that saved the builders doomed every thief. The choice not to build a stone-blocked doorway was another stroke of genius. A wall of masonry can eventually be cracked, tunneled, or pried apart. But a flood of loose desert?
Some regions experienced heavy rains exceeding 200 millimeters in 48 hours, resulting in flash floods.
You can't finish it off unless you remove every last grain. For all its simplicity, the design at Saqqara stands out as one of the smartest defenses ever created. It turned the most ordinary thing in Egypt, sand,
hundreds of tons of sand in a great arc round here,
into a shield stronger than stone. It never needed repairs. It never stopped working. For over 2,000 years, it protected Amenhotep's body. His chamber stayed sealed. His coffin lid stayed shut. And the trap kept doing its job until the day Zaki Saad broke through in 1941. That setup at Saqqara is brilliant, but it raises the question, did the Egyptians use sand like this anywhere else? The answer is yes, and the scale will surprise you. How Egyptians used sand as a weapon. By now, it's obvious that sand wasn't just waste the builders cleared out and dumped to the side. They treated it like a tool. They actually designed tombs around it. At Saqqara, one shaft known today as K24 dropped almost 98 feet straight down. Later, the whole thing was packed solid with clean yellow sand. And this wasn't just debris from digging. It was carefully poured in after the burials were finished. You could see tombs cut into the sides at different levels, but once that sand was in place, the shaft was locked tight. Anyone coming back later had to fight through an entire column of sand before they even touched a door. It was the exact same trick that made Amenhotep's tomb unbeatable, but applied on a larger scale. And this approach spread beyond Saqqara. Travel north to Abu Sir, and you'll find the burial chamber of Yufa, another elite official from the late 26th dynasty.
The sand of Abu Sir revealed important secrets of the tomb of Yufa that really is one of the tombs in the cemetery of the 26th dynasty, was the rebirth of the Egyptian civilization.
His tomb sat at the bottom of a giant square shaft, roughly 43 feet across in both directions and about 72 feet deep. At the very bottom was a decorated stone chamber. The most important detail wasn't the artwork, it was the floor. The chamber sat directly on top of a thick layer of compacted sand. Not rubble, not loose dirt, deliberately placed clean yellow sand that formed a base. When a Czech team opened the site in the 1990s, the tomb was untouched. That made it the first shaft tomb of this scale to be found unrobbed since the 1940s.
The tomb discovered in 1940 by Egyptologist Zaki Saad.
That fact alone shows how effective sand was as a guard. And Euphaia's shaft proves the builders were thinking in layers. It wasn't dug just for one person. Other chambers were carved into the shaft's walls at different depths. Once a burial was finished, the crew poured sand back in, sealing everything before moving on to the next. For intruders, that meant facing not one, but multiple sand barriers pressing down on them, plus chambers cut sideways into tough stone. It was a nightmare setup for anyone trying to break in. Now, here's the real challenge. These tombs weren't just about sand traps. They also had to handle some of the heaviest coffins you can imagine. Picture a stone box weighing 30, 40, or even 60 tons sitting in a chamber barely wide enough to stand in. You can't bring in a crew of 50 men and muscle it into place. The room is too small. You can't use big lifting cranes or levers because there's no space. So how did they do it? They built the entire chamber to act like a machine. That's why intact tombs are so important. When the sarcophagus is still sitting in place, lid on top, wall niches around it, drains below, ceiling holes above, you can piece together how the system worked. A lug that looks random on a lid in a museum suddenly makes sense when you see it lined up with a wall cut. If you really want to see how good Egyptians were at mixing sand with heavy stone, go underground at the Serapeum of Saqqara. This place was built to bury the sacred Apis bulls, and it's shocking even today. The galleries are narrow stone corridors that stretch on and on, with side chambers cut out to hold coffins so big they look impossible. A typical one weighs about 44 tons, and its lid adds another 28 tons. Some complete sets push past 60 tons. Now remember, these aren't sitting in wide-open courtyards. They were lowered into small underground vaults with tight corners and ceilings so low that you have to duck.
To those found in other subterranean galleries like the Serapeum at Saqqara, with its 24 mighty, perfectly made 100-ton precision granite boxes.
The only way to move something that big in a space that small is to use sand as your friend. You fill the chamber with sand or rubble, slide the box and lid into place on top of it, and then scoop the sand out slowly so the massive stone settles evenly onto the floor. That's not a guess. The Serapeum's own records, plus modern studies, confirm sand fill was used to stage and lower those gigantic coffins. So Egyptians weren't just using sand as a trap. They were using it as everyday, heavy-duty equipment whenever the job called for moving impossible weights underground. And you don't have to take anyone's word for it. The Serapeum is still there, part of the official Saqqara site. More than 20 of those monster coffins remain in the greater vaults. Walk the corridors and you'll see them. Boxes weighing 44 tons, lids 28 tons, squeezed into passages barely wider than the coffins themselves. You can also spot traces of rails and winch systems carved into the walls. But without sand staging, none of it would have been possible. It proves that for Egyptian builders, combining huge stone and controlled sand wasn't exotic. It was standard practice. Of course, sand wasn't the only trick in the toolbox. Egyptians also relied heavily on granite portcullises. These were enormous slabs that slid down grooves in the walls to block off passages. The best-known example sits inside Khufu's Great Pyramid. Right before the king's chamber is a small antechamber with 3 slots for portcullis blocks. Each slab slid vertically into place, guided by grooves still visible today. Above them are rounded slots, where logs and ropes once sat to lower the slabs safely. The setup was as simple as it gets. 3 granite blocks, 3 sets of grooves, and gravity doing the work. No gears, no levers, no nonsense, just weight shutting down access. And Khufu wasn't the only one to use it. Take Pepi II's pyramid at South Saqqara. Visitors moved through a sloping passage into a vestibule, then along a corridor. That corridor was blocked by 3 portcullis slabs stacked in a row before you ever reached the inner rooms. Again, the idea was the same. Layer-heavy, simple barriers in front of the most important space. The big picture starts to pop once you connect all of this. Whether it was sand traps, refill shafts, slow-release lids, or granite portcullises, Egyptians trusted what was simple and strong. They didn't need complicated machines. They didn't need huge teams underground. They leaned on the most reliable forces around them: gravity, sand, and stone. And the reason these systems still worked thousands of years later is because they didn't break down. Sand doesn't rust. Granite doesn't rot. Gravity doesn't stop pulling. That's why when archaeologists came along millennia later, the systems were still holding up. We've seen how late-period builders used sand to outsmart thieves. But what happens when you ditch clever tricks and just go huge, bleh? Why size couldn't save Egypt's largest tomb? The Valley of the Kings is legendary for its tombs, but the biggest one there doesn't even belong to a king. It belongs to his children. This is KV5, the family tomb of the sons of Ramesses II.
Ramesses' own tomb lay barely 100 meters away on the other side of the valley.
And it proves that building the largest underground maze in Egypt did not guarantee safety. It sprawls under the cliffs with more rooms than any other tomb in the valley. But looters still got in, and floods punished it again and again. KV5 is close to the valley entrance, almost staring right at the main path. That location made it obvious to travelers in the 1800s. They saw it, but they dismissed it. In 1825, a British explorer named James Burton poked around inside and looked at a few small rooms. Then, in 1902, Howard Carter, the same guy who later discovered King Tut, treated KV5 like a dump, tossing spoil there from other digs. Over the years, the entrance sank under mud, floods, and rubble. People forgot about it. For decades, it was basically invisible. Then came the late 1980s. An American archaeologist named Kent Weeks decided to give KV5 another chance.
The discovery of a lost tomb. A tomb known as KV5.
What looked like a plain doorway nobody cared about turned into one of the wildest surprises in Egyptian archaeology. By 1995, in the Valley of the Kings, reporters compared the moment to the shock of finding Tutankhamun. And for once, the hype was real. To picture KV5 driving straight into the hillside. From that main hallway, side corridors shoot off like branches. Those corridors break into clusters of smaller rooms. Deeper inside, a pillared hall acts like a central hub. And from there, even more corridors snake further into the cliffs. Most royal tombs in the valley have maybe 10 or 12 rooms. KV5 blows right past that. It has well over 100, and the true number is probably closer to 150. The Theban Mapping Project even published detailed plan sheets showing every single corridor and niche, right down to a statue of Osiris tucked into one of the halls. Looking at the map is like watching a neighborhood pop up underground. The further you trace, the more it sprawls. And the numbers kept climbing. Every time Weeks's team cleared one blockage, another passage opened up.
So have all these been discovered then?
Yes. So these are all tombs that have already been excavated.
In 1996, The New Yorker ran a story describing the shock of finding a tomb that just didn't stop. A few years later, the Los Angeles Times reported the team had identified roughly 150 chambers, but had only been able to clear about 7% of them. 7%. That number tells you more about KV5 than anything else. The place is gigantic, but almost all of it is still sealed off by debris. The reason is simple. KV5 sits low in the valley, right in the path of floodwater. Flash floods roar down the wadi whenever a sudden desert storm hits. They don't just bring water, they bring rocks, gravel, and mud. Over centuries, those floods buried KV5 again and again. That is why, even today, most of it is still locked away. The team has to dig through layers that are basically like concrete, the result of mud baking in the desert sun for centuries. On top of that, KV5 was robbed in ancient times. That part isn't debated. Thieves broke in and stripped valuables, leaving behind scraps of pottery, ushabti figurines, and bits of decorated coffins. The big treasure was long gone by the time Kent Weeks reopened the place. What's left is the architecture, the map, and the human traces that link it to Ramesses' sons. KV5 had the size, but that size was also its weakness. So why build something this enormous in the first place? The answer is Ramesses II himself. He ruled for more than 60 years, and he had a staggering number of children, dozens of sons and daughters. Many of those sons died during his reign, and KV5 seems to have been built as a family complex for them. Instead of one burial chamber at the end of a corridor, you get clusters tied to specific sons. KV5 is right next to KV7, the tomb of Ramesses himself, so its location makes sense. Artifacts pulled from the cleared rooms help give KV5 a human face. Excavators found ushabti figurines, those little servant statues meant to help in the afterlife. They also uncovered pottery, glass vessels, faience beads, and ostracti, broken shards of pottery used as notepads by the workers. Most importantly, there were remains tied to named sons, like Amun-Herkhepeshef, a prominent prince. Suddenly, the maze of corridors wasn't just stone, it was a family tree cut into the rock. Working in the valley isn't just about digging. Thousands of tourists stomp through every day. Each bus adds vibration. Each footstep stirs up dust. Weeks has spoken about the balance between tourism, which locals depend on for income, and preservation, which demands limits. That's why the Theban Mapping Project has also trained local guardians and pushed for better visitor management. Archaeology here isn't just about the dead. It's about the living community around the valley too. Pull back to the valley as a whole, and KV5 gives a bigger lesson. Protection isn't about size, it's about location. Tombs cut high into the cliffs survive better because they're above flood levels. Tombs cut low on the valley floor suffer, and KV5 is the proof. Every new corridor added another weak spot, another chance for water or thieves to get in. Over time, that turned into its greatest flaw. So what's the final takeaway? KV5 is everything you'd expect from a pharaoh with a massive ego and an enormous family. It's sprawling, ambitious, and jaw-dropping in scale. It has more rooms than any other tomb in the valley. It has artifacts that tie directly to Ramesses' sons. It has maps that look like blueprints for an underground city. But it also shows that size doesn't equal safety. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.